And welcome back to another video, and today I'm back with another exciting True Crime Tuesday video. So before we get into today's case, I just want to do the usual. So if you're new here, my name's Amber. I upload beauty, fashion and lifestyle content, and I also have an interest in true crime. Basically, I'm going to sit here and do my makeup and we're going to chat about a true crime case. I just want to quickly point out that I wasn't the first person on YouTube to do this. There is a girl called Bailey Sarian who is an American YouTuber, and she creates the most awesome true crime and makeup videos. She actually sort of was the first person around to do that, and I really drew inspiration from her and wanted to create this series. If you're new here, then please hit that subscribe button if you're interested in the true crime and makeup thing, or if you just love makeup. I upload quite a lot of makeup content over on my channel. Then please hit that subscribe button and come along and join my little family. And if you're already part of the family, make sure the notification bell switched on just so you're notified of whenever I upload a video, and why not give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. Now I just want to quickly do a quick disclaimer before we get into discussing the case. If you are sensitive to true crime cases and murder and things, then you might just want to click off this video and go back over to my channel and watch some of my makeup content instead. I also just want to quickly point out that I do mean no disrespect to anyone mentioned in this video. I basically just compiled together what I found on the internet to put this video out for you guys. So today's case is about a guy called Anthony Allen Shaw, and he is an American serial killer. He was active in America from 1986 all the way through to 1995. He eventually became known as the Torniquet killer because of the way that he murdered his victims. I thought today that we could do a quick overview of Anthony before we get into discussing his case and the crimes that he committed. So he was born on June 25th in 1962 in Rapid City, South Dakota. He was the first of 3 children, so he was the oldest out of his 3 siblings, and he had 2 younger sisters who were called Gina and Laurel. His father was called Rob Shaw, and he was discharged from the United States Air Force, where he was once a computer technician, and his mother was called Dina Shaw, and she was honorably discharged from the American Air Force. I think it was because at the time she was pregnant with Anthony, and that's why they obviously let her go. So during his education, it was clear that he had like social issues, he had discipline problems, and he was quite teased, picked on during his school years. The family moved around quite a lot before he was in high school, so I don't think he ever really had a particular place to call home because they moved around so often. I mean, the family moved up to 9 times before he attended high school. There was a lot of aggressive behaviour he displayed leading up to the murders. You know, as a young child, there was things that were quite disturbing that he did. There's a lot of reoccurring events in these serial killers' childhood, such as killing animals, things like that, that sort of start as their doorway into that life, if that makes sense. So in 1967, when he was aged around 5, he actually killed a neighbour's kitten because his sister wouldn't let him play with it. He's 5-year-old and he's already killing cats, like, He then later stabbed his sister with a screwdriver over the whole ordeal, which is just like a whole nother level. And he actually stabbed his sister in the head. His sister, obviously, there's not a lot discussed about it, but I imagine his sister must have went to hospital and everything was okay because his sister was then fine after that. And then in 1975, aged 13 to 14, he actually claims that his mother sexually molested him and was sexually abusing him. It's sort of obvious to detectives and investigators when they start to investigate his crimes that he was clearly physically or sexually abused at some point in his life due to the aggression that he displays and the way that he commits the murders that he commits. In 1977, age 16, he actually began to drink and smoke pot a lot, so obviously smoke weed a lot, and he claims to allegedly have killed a homeless man. Now, this has never been proven as such. They've never found a body. He claimed to, but they could never really prove it. They don't know whether it was just because he was 16 and maybe he thought he was being clever by claiming to have done something like that. Not really 100% sure, but they never ever found any evidence to suggest that that actually happened. When he was starting to get to his late teens, you know, 16-year-old, he began to sort of stalk neighbourhood girls and harass like the pretty neighbourhood girls. And then in 1983 he actually met a girl called Gina Lynn Worley, and at this point he's in his 20s. He's 21-year-old, so he's just like in his early 20s. They then went on to marry and had 2 daughters named Amber and Tiffany. And I don't think the two particularly had the best relationship. He was always very aggressive, and I actually watched a documentary where one of his daughters was talking about him, and they were saying that like he was always to the neighbourhood, like he put on this really good face, and like everyone thought he was like this such lovely man, when really behind closed doors they just had no idea what was going on, basically. Like, you know, he was one of these people who was he so easily convinced people that he was just do anything for anyone, and really there was more to it than that. The couple not long after that then did divorce, and Shaw was actually given custody of the 2 young daughters. Not 100% sure why that was the case, and obviously they were then living with him. On September 26, 1986, there was a young girl called Laurie Lee Tremblay. She was a 14-year-old girl, and she was walking to school when she was attacked. He later went on to explain, once obviously he had admitted to the murders, he had semi-regularly given her rides to school. He'd sort of got to know her, so she obviously felt safe around him. At this point, obviously, she felt safe getting into his car to be able to be dropped off at school, because every other time she got in the car with him, he just seemed like a nice guy who was dropping her off at school. On this occasion, he actually tried to undo her bra, and this then ended up in an altercation between the 2 of them. Obviously, she didn't feel comfortable with that, and they started to argue. He then panicked and he hit her over the back of the head to stop her screaming, because obviously she had started to scream because she wanted to get out. And then he used a cotton cord to strangle her. The problem was that when he used the cotton cord kept snapping all of the time, so he actually hurt his hand upon doing this to her, and then that's why he went on to use a tourniquet to murder his victims. So he then just literally dumped her body behind this Mexican restaurant, and she was left there. She was then found obviously by detectives, and her case was a cold case for quite a lot of years. They just didn't have anything to link anyone to the crime. They couldn't find any solid evidence, I don't think, in order to convict anyone. Then on April 16th, 1992, he murdered Maria del Carmen Estrada. She was aged 21, and her case was an unsolved cold case for more than a decade, which I just can't even imagine what her friends and family were going through. So upon the morning of Maria's disappearance, Maria was actually supposed to be going to her best friend's house. Like, when she didn't turn up to her best friend, at first I think she was sort of like, oh, maybe she's just forgot, she's like gone on to do something else and then just forgot, you know, she'll call me later. And then when she didn't call her, she was like, this is out of character for her. Like, she wouldn't normally just like miss meeting me and then not be in touch with me. Like, she knew something was not right, so she searched all over for her. I think she contacted like friends and family, and like no one had heard anything from her. She'd seen the news and she'd seen that there'd been a body found at the back of the Dairy Queen. She decided to go to the scene and obviously explain that her friend had been missing, and she'd got a glimpse of these shoes on the body, and she just knew there and then that it was Maria. Because Maria had quite a distinct, the shoes that Maria had on at that time were quite distinct, and they were not like the type of shoes that you would see everyone wearing every day, so she just knew it was her. And then obviously she eventually identified it as being her friend Maria. Maria was sexually assaulted, strangled and dumped round the back of the Dairy Queen. Detectives found her with her pants dropped to her knees, a rope around her neck, which I'll insert a picture of what it looked like, a rope around her neck with a piece of wood. This was the tourniquet, so he'd used the tourniquet to strangle her. There was semen found in her mouth and scrapings were taken from her fingernails, but I'm not sure whether DNA wasn't a thing, because her case then went as a cold case for quite a long period of time. Her cold case was then a cold case for like more than a decade, so it didn't get solved until 10 years after it actually occurred. The next victim of Anthony was actually his only living victim, and this was a 14-year-old girl called Selma Jenks. And on October 19th 1993, 14-year-old Selma had been sexually assaulted in her home. She was bound, but he didn't kill her. He basically just fled the scene. He tied her up with an electrical cord and let her go, and I think when he bound her, he maybe bound her face so she didn't really see who he was. In a way, she was quite lucky, but then, you know, what an awful thing to have to live through. So his next victim was a young girl who was only 9 years old, called Diane. She was murdered on August 8th 1994, and it was really sad because she basically literally just gone to the store for her mum to get a bag of sugar, and people saw her, people witnessed her. There was even like one guy in the street was like, I think you should get yourself home, like type of thing, and she was like, yeah, I'm on my way home now. The store clerk remembered her coming in the store. She left the store fine, and then she vanished and was obviously found murdered. She was found with a rope around her neck, which was attached to a bamboo stick, which was another tourniquet murder. She was beaten, sexually assaulted and strangled to death. She was found in an empty parking lot. The police officer said he remembered it so, like, the image just stuck in his head of she was just wearing this little Halloween t-shirt, and that was all she had on. He used a nylon parachute cord which was tightened with a bamboo stick. This then linked the case between her and the Maria case together, because they both were using the same, they had the same MO, they were using the same murder weapon. Then on the 16th of July 1995, age 16, Dana Sanchez was found murdered. She had literally just took a walk in her neighbourhood. She'd gone for a walk in the neighbourhood and turned up dead. It was quite interesting with this case because they actually managed to find her body, because someone, later to be discovered that it was Anthony himself, decided to actually ring the local news station and put in a tip. This was 7 days after she was murdered, that they rang the local news station, and it was Anthony. He spoke to obviously one of the girls at the news station, and he told her that they needed to go and find this body. It was in a vacant field, you'll find a body there. And it took them a little while because this field was a big ass field. Like, it took them a while to find the body. First, like when they first started searching, because it was so vast, they didn't find anything at first, and they actually thought that it was a prank, and then they eventually come across her body was in the middle of this abandoned field. He later admitted that he had offered her a ride in his van, and then he basically started to flirt with her. This young girl had a boyfriend, like she obviously wasn't interested, but in his head she was. He grabbed her, and obviously she panicked, she screamed, so she resisted and he strangled her to death with a tourniquet. He went on to say, like, she was such a fighter, like she obviously, like, basically she was quite hard to kill because she fought for her life. This is where things get interesting, and this is where, well, I don't know whether you can see he slips up because he had no choice but to provide the police with what they wanted. He was basically asked to provide the police with a DNA sample. This was in 1998 because he had been molesting his daughters. So when I said earlier that his daughters said, you know, like, people on the outside looking in thought he was such a great man, behind closed doors he was molesting his own kids. And it makes me so sad that, like, I mean, I don't know what was going on with the mother. I don't know whether there was a reason as to why she didn't get custody, but it makes me so sad that these two girls suffered through this when they could have been placed with their mother, but there was obviously a reason why they weren't placed with their mother. So he was then convicted of molesting his daughters. So by this point his DNA is then on file. Sorry guys, I've just finished one eye off camera because I was talking too much and not doing enough makeup was basically what the issue was. So we are now in 2000, so we are 2 years after they've took his DNA sample. Now, what actually happened was, you know, I was saying about cold cases go into storage. These detectives decided to bring back the Maria del Carmen Estrada case because they wanted to investigate it a little bit more. Obviously, they knew there was multiple cases involved, so obviously, you know, who doesn't want to catch a serial killer? Like, they need to be dealt with. So they then decided to test the DNA that was found under her fingernails. I'm assuming, like I said, that these things weren't tested before now because there wasn't the ability to test them. So they decided to test the fingernails because there was obviously DNA under the fingernails, but due to problems in the lab, there wasn't matches straight away, and an audit result actually meant that the lab was closed in 2002. So 2 years after they were given the DNA, it still wasn't tested. So then some of the samples were actually sent to another lab, but then in 2003 the DNA under Estrada's fingernails matched what was Shaw's DNA, because obviously at this point they had Shaw's DNA on file due to him molesting his daughters. Like, yeah, I know, what a guy. So then they decide to bring him in for interrogation, and 11 hours into the interrogation he confesses to the murders of Maria, Diana and Dana. But at this point they weren't aware that he was linked to the rape of Selma and the killing of Laurie. And obviously, because, like I say, the Laurie case was so different and there wasn't a tourniquet used, they didn't see any links originally. And then it becomes clear that he had switched from using the original technique in which he murdered Laurie to a tourniquet because he had hurt his finger. He then turns round and says to the detective, "Does the name Laurie Lee Tremblay mean anything to you?" Things sort of clicked and it made sense that he was also linked to Laurie's murder as well. And then that's when he went on to obviously explain why he changed his signature. Being that detective and hearing those, there was words come out that his mouth. Like, when I watched the documentary on this and I heard the detective, I was like, that must have been like real creepy. But then I suppose in a way, like, at least they got another case solved as well. Like, at least another family got it's just so bittersweet, isn't it? Because it's like nice when they catch these killers and the family get closure, but then I think, like, imagine if you were someone who's kept out hope that your daughter's still alive or your son's still alive, and then you find the bodies found. Like, I don't know, like, I think it must be so difficult to be on the receiving end of that information. So in 2004, even though they had Shaw's confession to all of the murders and the rape, it was going to be very difficult for prosecutors to prosecute him for them. Maybe it's because of lack of evidence, and don't forget, a lot of these cases had been cold cases for a lot of years, but they knew for Estrada's murder, for Maria Estrada's murder, they knew they had that solid evidence for her, because obviously they had DNA. You can't, like, I'm not being funny, but there's one thing that you can't argue with, and that is DNA evidence. You just really can't argue with that. You know, no one's got the same DNA, so there's no way you can get your way out of it. So the prosecutors decided to just focus on that case for prosecution. The jury found him guilty of capital murder, and his last surviving victim actually testified. Selma Jenks actually stood up and testified to what had happened to her, which I imagine would have been a big help in the case. It was nice to see that. I don't know, like, it was nice that she stood up and she had, you know, that would have took a lot for her to do that. Like, I can't imagine of being in her shoes, but then I suppose she knew that this monster was going to be behind bars. So yeah, she stood up and she testified against him. The jury suggested that he be sentenced to death. It literally took them an hour to decide. He actually asked to be sentenced to death as well. So he was sentenced to death on November 15th, 2004. He wasn't actually executed until 2018. So he said that he believed it was time for him to sacrifice his life for what he'd done. He wiped away a tear and sniffled after his attorney explained his highly unusual request for a death sentence. He instructed his lawyer not to cross-examine witnesses or make any other effort to persuade jurors to give him a life sentence for strangling at least 4 females over a 9-year span. It's said that he's accepted the Lord into his life. What I actually forgot to mention before we go on to talk about his execution is that he did confess that there were other murders that they hadn't found bodies for, and I don't think he was willing to give up. And I think detectives at this point knew they clearly knew they had a serial murder on their hands, and I think they were aware of that things could possibly be more than what had been, you know, like more than what they had proof of. So on January 18th 2018, so 4 years after being convicted, he was sentenced. He was actually injected with lethal injection. So his final statement says, quote, "No amount of words or apology could ever undo what I've done. I wish I could undo the past, but it is what it is." Yeah, but then I think about these things and I think, he's saying this now, but would, like, if he was still out on the streets, he would probably still be committing murders. So, you know, people say things when they're in situations and you think people just sometimes tell people what they want to hear. And I sometimes feel with these murderers that, like, he's just saying that because that's what people want to hear. I'm just going to pop my lippy on and then we're going to finish up this video. Then he obviously was injected and he said, "Ooh, I can feel that." Well, I hope you do feel that. I know I shouldn't get personal, but I'm not being funny. You can't say this guy doesn't deserve it. And then he died 13 minutes later. I don't know, this one is a very, very sad story, because I think you've got, you know, all these girls that just didn't get, they were so young, they didn't get to live life to their potential. And I think it's just so sad that their lives were cut short at an early age, you know. I also feel for his two daughters that they, you know, grew up with a father that did molest them, and then not only did he molest them, he went on to being a serial murderer. The whole case is just so awful. I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings on this case down below. Now, I do normally end my videos by being like, hope you've enjoyed this video. I feel a little bit weird doing that with this video set, like with these true crime videos. Basically say that I'll see you in the next one.